This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here. And Tripp, another loaded podcast we have here. We got some exodus coaches-wise in Columbus. We'll talk about that, if there's a concern there or not. We have an insanely record-breaking recruit from Michigan. We'll talk expectations. We have part 2 of the transfer portal winners and losers here as well. It is a jam-packed show we have for you. So let's not waste any time. Let's just dive right in, get into it here. And the first thing is, Tripp, we learned over the weekend since we last spoke, Ohio State now having 2 other coaches leave the staff to go to the NFL. Justin Fry, their offensive line coach, goes to the Cardinals. Chip Kelly goes to the Raiders to be their OC. Obviously, they followed Jim Knowles, at least in terms of leaving Columbus, who went to Penn State. A massive coaching exodus we've seen here in Columbus since Ohio State won the national title. Let me start here and ask you this question. Is there a reason for concern? Should Ohio State fans push the panic button after seeing some really qualified and talented coaches go out the door?
No, because I think this is the nature of college football these days. And first of all, you're the Ohio State Buckeyes, right? If this is the Pittsburgh Panthers, if this is the Indiana Hoosiers, if this is the Purdue Boilermakers or Vanderbilt, maybe you're talking about this a little bit different. But they're Ohio State. They're going to be able to get quality replacements. Like if this is baseball and we start talking about WAR, you're going to be able to get a replacement level coach in these positions because they are Ohio State. They have the resources. Ryan Day is still the head coach. There's continuity there. And when you have the success that an organization, program, whatever it may be, has, where are other organizations or programs going to look to take their talent from? The team that was at the mountaintop, and that happened to be this past year, Ohio State. Ultimately, it's still Ryan Day's team. He's the architect of this whole thing. And when they transitioned from Urban Meyer to Ryan Day, it's not that Chip Kelly was the first hire. Jim Knowles wasn't the first hire. They've been through different coaches, different coordinators. And while, yes, they maybe had not won a national championship with those staffs and the makeup of those staffs, they've been awfully darn close before. And in the nature of the 12-team playoff, right? This year, as we've talked about time and time again over the last month, Ohio State wouldn't have been there in a 4-team playoff format in 2024-2025. I think it's the nature of the beast. By being the best, teams are going to steal and take from the best. But also, in this era of college football, you're going to see more coaches experience burnout with the recruiting, with the NIL, with all of the rule changes. And there's a third part of it, and maybe the most important part of this whole thing. Money talks. Chip Kelly is getting $6 million to be the highest paid coordinator in the National Football League. And like the irony here is he's on Pete Carroll's staff. Could you ever imagine the days of USC and Oregon going head to head and Pete Carroll going against Chip Kelly, the head coach of the Ducks? And now they're coaching on the same staff of not the Oakland Raiders, but the Las Vegas Raiders in the National Football League. Jim Knowles is getting $3.1 million to be the defensive coordinator at Penn State. And per the CBS story that came out today, I'm not sure if you read all 4,000 words. We can dive into that as well. He can reach up to $4 million per year based on the incentives of his contract to be at Penn State. There's other connections between Justin Fry and going to the Cardinals. And we'll talk about this with other coaches. It's not just Ohio State. So yes, Ohio State's had massive turnover. There is an exodus from Columbus, but no school is in better position than Ohio State to fill these positions and still keep status quo the success that they've had.
And to your point, like, I think this is just normal. Like, look at Alabama, right? Under Nick Saban. I feel like every single year they were shuffling in new offensive coordinators, new defensive coordinators, new special teams guys. Some cases, all 3 coordinators had to be replaced in an offseason. Ryan Day's here getting through 2. Like, that is like, just like you said, when you win a championship, everyone wants a piece of that.
Can I make one point? A Big Ten team that was in the college football playoff semifinals this year replaced all 3 of its coordinators last off season. Penn State.
It's good. It's a good point. And Ryan Day, I think to your point, in hiring Chip Kelly, in hiring Jim Knowles, has proven like you should be able to trust him. That whoever they do hire here will be good enough to fill those vacancies.
And while your coordinators are critical to your success, especially if your head coach is a CEO type, and like as we get into the discussion of who could replace Chip Kelly, maybe Ryan Day takes play calling back over for Ohio State. But ultimately, I think in this era of college football, your head coach needs to be a CEO. Your offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator are really your X's and O's schematic guys, the people, the evil genius that's going to lock himself in the room and they're going to come up with the game plan every single week. Obviously, the head coach has to know when and where, how to be involved. That's what makes a great head coach. But it's the position coaches who are on the recruiting trail, who are forming relationships, who are in the meeting rooms with these athletes. And you don't have to look any further than Brian Hartline in the wide receivers room at Ohio State. He's had opportunities to go wherever he wants in the sport of college football. He hasn't even been given, and we'll see this time around, like last time he was elevated to co-offensive coordinator at Ohio State, but he's never been given the opportunity to call plays there, but he's still there. Ultimately, it's the continuity. Larry Johnson on the defensive line for Ohio State. It's the continuity of these position coaches that is really, really critical, I think, to the sustained success of the program. So while your coordinators may change, if your head coach and the critical position coaches stay the same, I think that's where your culture, the relationships, the recruiting, and then ultimately, I don't want to call them a dime a dozen, but what's the difference between a Kevin Wilson Ohio State and a Chip Kelly Ohio State? Well, if Ryan Day is still the guy in charge, they're still going to be incredibly successful offensively. So I think it's that head coach and then the position coaches are where you really, if you can get 3 to 4 to 5 position coaches who are loyal, who represent your school, 1, 2, 3 of them might be an alumni of the program, and they bleed, like in this case, they bleed scarlet and gray. And you have that continuity at the top and at that level. And then with the new rules of college football, now your GAs, your analysts, right? They now have a more active role in coaching and on the field. So it's other alumni coming back, other players coming back, former NFL coaches who are looking for that reclamation project, or someone who's, doesn't feel like recruiting anymore, doesn't really feel like being the head guy. They've made enough money. That's where I think you really supplement it with your staff. Well, even 5, certainly 10 years ago, it was the 9 coaches, the head coach, the assistants. That's kind of it. It's changed so much that I don't think, for number one, the big 3 reasons that we identified at the beginning, but because the moving nature of the sport is certainly at a place like Ohio State, not somewhere where you hit the panic button.
And the last thing I'll include is just like now, especially that they won a title. And again, you saw it a lot at Alabama. Well, there may be more rating of staffs and less continuity when it comes to the actual play callers offensively and defensively. Mm-hmm. The good news for Ohio State is you're going to attract the best of the best. That's a position, offensive and defensive coordinator, that is so high profile that, just look at their last one. And they took a sitting head coach in the Big Ten and Chip Kelly, got him out of UCLA and had him come to Columbus to call plays. Like you want him there longer than a year, ideally, again, to have more continuity. But like that job is so attractive that you are getting candidates there that are so qualified that to have them there for a year or two, it makes up for it. So just like we saw at Alabama, taking so many former head coaches and bringing them on and kind of being like a nursing ground, I guess, if you will, for head coaches trying to get their reps back up. Alabama did it in the SEC for years. Maybe Ohio State here can do that in the Big Ten for years to come. Winning a championship definitely helps. And again, I think Ryan Day, we're going to talk about at least offensive coordinator candidates here, you're going to have no shortage of talent. No shortage of talent whatsoever, both in college football and I think in possibly to the pros. Like that's how I think attractive and high profile this job is.
I think the word you're looking for is like coaching rehab or coaching reclamation projects.
What did you call it?
What did you call it?
Like a nursing ground? I've been watching a lot of shark videos on TikTok recently. So like when they come to the shallow waters, like, they're nursing, they're giving birth. So like that word has been in my mind recently. So you can blame the internet for that.
While we have a moment, I'm surprised we weren't vesties today. I wore the vest because of you. You've been probably actually in Atlanta, you wore one too. I was going to say, since you've been back from Atlanta, I think I've seen you in a vest every single day. Maybe it's the warm comforts of your plush New York City studios as we record on this Monday night. You're at the Fan Studios, CBS Sports Network. That's big time tonight.
How about this is the perks of recording on a Monday night, right after my show ends. You come here, I get some good lighting, get a good background. We get Maryland and Boomer Esiason involved in the podcast as well. So apologies that no vest here. It's like 40 degrees today in New York City, which feels like it's like 75.
Yeah.
So I felt dressing light today, just went with like a little long sleeve.
It's about time Maryland made a Big Ten football podcast here. No, we did hit on the Terps last week when we started our transfer portal winners, losers, and different. So we did hit on the Terps there. And we've had an affinity all season for Ty Felton and Billy Edwards Jr. And we've talked a little Mike Loxley throughout the course of the year. He's good for a quote or two. But yeah, pretty nondescript year for Boomer Esiason's Terps. And they were what? They were in the ACC when he was there?
I believe so, yes. Which, yeah. Well, we'll still adopt him, I guess, now. We'll just... That's right. You just consume everything. We'll take his stats. We'll put him in there. We'll take Pete Carroll and Matt Leinert's stats on the Pac-12 days. We'll bring them on in. Just absorb it all. Trip.
You did mention a very particular note that we probably should share with our audience. You said we're recording on a Monday night. Typically, everyone's used to consuming our podcast wherever you get your podcast, or we appreciate our YouTube audience that keeps growing. We've gotten a lot more engagement on social media with some of the viral clips you've been posting. I don't really think we've had a Hickey's hot take in a while. You've kind of tempered your takes here since the end of the college football season. But because we're into the off season, there's not games on Saturday that we need to urgently break down on Monday morning. You're obviously really busy on Sunday nights with Hick at Night. Plug.
That's right. Hick at Night. Night spelled Nite. Off play of Nick at Night. Don't sue me.
Are you going to tell the audience where they can listen, how they can
listen?
On
the Infinity Sports Network. If you have an Odyssey app, which you should anyway, you can listen to our podcast on the Odyssey app. So type Still Enrolled, and after you type Still Enrolled, maybe type in Hick at Night. Again, Night spelled Nite, and you can get a little best of both worlds. How about that?
Anyway, so you work late. Great plug. So you work late. I listen, but I'm in it more for the TikTok videos, like
that's this day and age. You kids, you boomers,
not the shower ones, not the shower.
No, you don't like those? Oh no. Okay. Maybe
anyway, you're busy on Sunday nights. Monday morning from 10:10 to 11:25 in 103 Rackley Building, we have COM 260W with Professor Tripp at Penn State. So with your schedule Sunday night, my Monday morning's a little bit more occupied. It's the off season. We're still going to bring you 2 podcasts a week, but we're going to record on either Monday nights. I did fall asleep on the couch before we started recording, which is probably why we had to do 3 takes of the open. But we're going to record on Monday night.
That's how we record these, not make them live.
or Tuesday mornings, whichever we end up deciding. And that means we'll deliver podcasts to you on Tuesdays and Thursdays moving forward.
Slight change, but hopefully you still appreciate the good content coming your way. Speaking of good, Trip, let's see how this transition goes. Ohio State, I think it's fair to say they'll have no shortage of good candidates now to replace Chip Kelly as their offensive coordinator for 2025 and beyond. When you look at Ohio State and, you mentioned Kevin Wilson, we obviously mentioned before Brian Hartline. Is there a name that at least right now preliminary? Wow, that was terrible. Preliminary? I'm going to give up on that word. Is there a candidate right now that is the what?
Initially. Whenever I start on a word that I can't complete preliminarily. I don't even know. Is that right?
I don't know. I think I'm saying it wrong. Candidate? I think you're saying.
Is there a preliminary?
No, preliminary. Is there a preliminary? There we go. We nailed it. Is there a preliminary candidate? Oh, man. English. Thank God you don't teach, and thank God my English teachers don't listen to this. Holy smokes, we are crushing it. We are crushing it. Those Penn State students are lucky. Holy cow.
This is your way of advocating for Tuesday morning recordings. Anyway. What you're trying to say, is there a candidate that's most desired for this Ohio State job, and who should be the initial target or the big target for Ohio State in this situation? Since I asked the question, or at least finished asking the question, why don't you go first?
Well, I feel like the obvious name, right? And the one my brain went to right away was Brian Hartline, right? Yeah. He's been on the staff for forever. Like you mentioned, he's been technically the offensive coordinator before, has been co-OCs. He's never had play calling responsibilities. And I think now with Ryan Day and how this worked, I don't expect Ryan Day to take play calling back. I expect him to make this hire, and whoever is the offensive coordinator will also be the play caller as well. So it feels like easy, right? This guy, he's been there forever. He's receiver of the program. He does, there's no better recruiter maybe in all the country than what Brian Hartline's been able to do with just consistently getting in 5-star receiver after 5-star receiver. Had another big time hit with Jeremiah Smith. So it feels like, at least for me, the easy answer trip would be Brian Hartline. But let me ask you this, and let me play devil's advocate to my own answer here. He's been around the program for a while, since 2017. He's gotten more responsibility, yet every time in the last few years they've had a offense coordinator opening, they've bypassed him. They've gone somewhere else. They haven't been quickly to give him the reins. And again, even the 1 year he was offense coordinator in 2023, he wasn't calling the plays. Ryan Day was. Is it just like, do you just look at Brian Hartline at this point as an elite, insane recruiter and developer at receiver, but not someone that is just maybe a natural born play caller?
It's interesting because I don't think we know the answer to that because he's not had the opportunity. And
Right.
it's curious as to why in the building he hasn't been elevated with his pedigree to that point, with all the different coaches and Day and Kelly and Kevin Wilson, Urban Meyer, like everyone that he's been around, Jim Tressel, going back to his playing, everyone that he's been around, you think by this point, his involvement game plan, meeting, and I know he's extremely highly paid as a wide receivers coach, offensive coordinator, and one of the elite recruiters in college football. It is perplexing as to why he hasn't been elevated to that role yet. That said, when West Virginia comes calling, when other schools have come calling, Brian Hartline's never been a flight risk either. He still hasn't shown that he's going to take that next step somewhere else. It's an interesting decision because if you feel like he's ready, you elevate it. And maybe Brian Hartline doesn't want to be a head coach. Maybe he doesn't want to be an offensive coordinator, right? We don't know. If you feel like he's ready, it feels like the obvious choice to elevate him, but it's Ohio State. And they just hired for last season a head coach at a fellow Big Ten school to be their offensive coordinator. Brian Hartline seems too safe, too casual, not flashy enough, and honestly, not qualified enough to be the next offensive coordinator at Ohio State.
You know what? That initially sounds like a hot take, but I think that's fair because even before Chip Kelly, remember, for the few weeks he was there, Bill O'Brien was the offensive coordinator. Yeah. And with obviously all his experience, right, being Penn State's head coach, the Patriots offensive coordinator, going down to Alabama, that is very fair. Like, you look at the last few guys, Kevin Wilson was Indiana's head coach before he came to Ohio State. Like, these guys are all former head coaches, tons of experience, tons of success calling plays. It is against right now what Ryan Day has done since becoming the head coach of promoting a guy with no experience. It is fascinating. And look, to your point, maybe Brian Hartline doesn't want to call plays, or maybe he doesn't want to be a head coach, and maybe he's okay with sharing game planning, or maybe he himself doesn't feel ready and says, you know what, let's bring someone else in. I still want to learn and kind of grow. He's only 37 years old, so it's not like he has plenty of time to, if he's patient, likes Columbus, to go nowhere. You make a great point. And that's what just makes this job so intriguing, because the standard for what they've had the last few years is so high.
Brian Hartline would probably be qualified to be the offensive coordinator at all but like 2 or 3 college football programs, right? And that's not a knock on him. He could get the job and do a great job. Like, no one's doubting that. And in fact, most people probably would expect, myself included, to Brian Hartline get the job and do it and kill it, right? There's nothing that he hasn't succeeded at in his role as a college football coach. The best position group, hands down, in college football year after year. Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, you go Olave, what they have now, you go
Marvin
on and
Harrison
on.
Jr. It's like you almost forget about it because Jeremiah Smith's been so good.
There's too many names.
Crazy.
There's too many names.
You're right.
But it feels like here's the opportunity. Do you get a head coach from the MAC in your backyard? And I know the name that's been thrown out, Joe Moorhead, who was Penn State's offensive coordinator. He went to Oregon as offensive coordinator. He hasn't had some success when he's at Mississippi State as head coach. Now he's at Akron as their head coach, but has proven to be just as skilled a play caller and feel as there is. Like, that's a big name. Pat Shurmur, I've seen thrown out. He was Chip Kelly's offensive coordinator when he's in Philadelphia, longtime NFL OC or quarterbacks coach. He's at Colorado right now with Deion Sanders as their OC. One of the names you put on the list that I know has been thrown out as well, Will Stein from Oregon. He's their offensive coordinator. And while that would seem in other situations as bizarre, to me, this situation, it wouldn't. It's still the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think there's something. If I had to put my money where my mouth is, it's not Brian Hartline.
Let me ask you this, because I've just been thinking about this in my head as we're talking here. When you look at all the changes, right, on the offensive line, a majority of those guys are gone. You obviously lose Will Howard. You lose both running backs. Jeremiah Smith is still there. You lose Emeka Buka. You lose G. Scott. There's going to be a lot of new faces next year in offense. Does that make it easier with all new things and all new faces, I should say you know what? Let's take a chance on Brian Hartline. Got a lot of new here. Let's see what happens. Or does that almost hammer home the fact of, because we have new quarterback, new running backs, new receivers outside of Smith, a new offensive line, we got to get someone, to your point, like Will Stein, like Joe Moorhead, like even Jason Candle maybe at Toledo, who's been around and had some good offenses there as well. Like, does it hammer home the point of, we need someone with experience, with a track record that has done this for a while? We can't take, I don't say a guess or a flyer, but a guess on someone like Brian Hartline who's never actually called plays before. Like, it feels like with so much new, it almost makes it more difficult to say, you know, we're also going to now put in a new offense coordinator as well.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that, because I think ultimately Ryan Day is still going to have final say over what the offense looks like, and it's still going to have a Ryan Day identity to it, with him being an offensive guy. And then college football today is they're still going to have their 15 spring practices. They're going to have their off-season workouts. They're going to have their time in the summer to put it in. You know, if this was a move that was necessitated, say July, August, it's a different story. But I think there's so much time still to allow this to play out. And with an offensive-oriented head coach, I don't think that's a factor.
Let me ask you this then, because I've been to a few websites to compile some of these names we've just talked about. One website, Sports Illustrated, put out a name that we've not yet discussed. Andy Kotelnicki. Is there any concern, should there be maybe any concern, that, hey, look, you stole our DC, we're going to get back at you, we're going to steal your OC? Is that plausible at all in your mind?
Probably not in this situation, based on Kotelnicki's dealings with West Virginia, what happened there, and with Knowles. Yeah, I don't think that's plausible in this situation, but it's college football. I mean, money talks. You never know. But I think that's more thrown out there, and I've seen a couple other places throw it out there as like fun games. Hey, wouldn't this be a coy move to make? But I don't see that as plausible in this situation. And Penn State, you would assume, would make a very lucrative offer to retain, because they've appeared to put their chips all in for 2025. So which is probably the biggest reason why it's not even plausible. Like, I would assume Kotelnicki, with Knowles coming in what he got in his deal, is probably knocking on James Franklin's door too. Like, hey, our offense is pretty good last year. Yeah, I don't think that's plausible in this situation at all.
And also, too, I mean, you look at next year, 2025, right? If it's a year by year, maybe this is, you're looking for a platform to kind of boost your stock to get, a better, let's say, head coaching job than West Virginia. I would argue Kotelnicki's platform is bigger with Penn State next year than it would be for Ohio State, just with so many questions on offense and defense next year. There's still going to be a top 5, 10 team preseason. Still probably be with the talent they have a top 10 team all year. But it's not like Penn State's got no talent either. I would agree. I don't think that's possible, but it was just interesting. Saw it, and I'm like, I mean, Ohio State does have a reason for vengeance, if you will, with how the whole Jim Knowles thing went down.
Yeah, and I think it's a sport of perception, a lot's perception. And I don't know that this is fair or not, because I think James Franklin's, and I've been at Penn State's practices, right? I've seen how the man coaches the game. Like, there's this misnomer about him that he's just the CEO, he's hands off. He's in meeting rooms. He's watching film. He's out there on the field instructing and being a part of game planning. But I think from where Penn State went with Mike Yurcich to Andy Kotelnicki in the span of less than 12 months, Kotelnicki is going to get more credit for Penn State's offense than Franklin is, even though Franklin's an offensive guy. And I don't believe that's fair, but I'm just telling you, that's what the perception is from the outside looking in. Whoever goes to Ohio State, I feel like the chance of the perception elevating you there is less because of the Ryan Day influence.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Last thing here, at least on the OC, when you look at the list, we just kind of mentioned a lot of names we banter back and forth on. Maybe there's a dark horse candidate we're not seeing. Maybe it's someone in the NFL. Oh no, I thought you don't. Do you know something? Or are you just saying
no, I don't know, but I'm just saying there's got to be.
You would maybe a sitting head coach somewhere. Like I would agree, but leaving them out for a second. If I was Ohio State and Ryan Day, I would go after Will Stein first. I think if you can again. Not only hire someone who's done it, who's now produced 2 high-octane offenses, 2 quarterbacks back-to-back with Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel finishing as Heisman finalists, and also hurt Oregon in the process, right? Take away from one of your rivals now and hire him. I think that would be my first move. If Stein says no, I think I would look at Brian Hartline. If you feel he's ready. That's the big question. He's been there for a while. We'll see the patience. I feel like this would be the time I would take the plunge with Brian Hartline. When you look at that list we just talked about, does one name excite you, stand out to you? Like, oh, I'm in, let's do it?
Man, I think all the names we mentioned, I think one of the head coaches from the MAC, either Jason Candle at Toledo, who's shown that they can be incredibly successful at the number 1 MAC offense in 2023, but Joe Moorhead's called plays at that level before in the Big Ten. And he's been incredibly successful at doing it. And those names, those would probably be the ones I'd be most enticed by if I were an Ohio State fan, the reported names. But you just know there's a name. You just know there's a name out there just lurking. And that's the one that Ohio State's going to go with. Like maybe Josh McCown wants to get out of an OC position and goes to Ohio State, right? Like, I'm trying to think of who are the rising stars in coaching in the NFL that could be elevated by a coordinator position at a school that pays what Ohio State's going to pay.
And I mean, Ryan Day was only in the NFL, right? 2 years, one with the Eagles, one with the 49ers. Any connections there? I mean, seems like your boy Kellen Moore is going to the Saints, so I don't think we have to worry about Kellen Moore calling plays for the Buckeyes next year, but it's interesting. It's interesting. And to your point about Joe Moorhead, his offensive coordinator tenures have gone really well. You said Penn State, Oregon. The head coaching tenures have not gone very well. I wonder if that's a guy where kind of you see how, again, Akron not going very far, maybe not getting a lot of interest in the head coach. Maybe he's there for the longer haul. You would think Jason Candle maybe uses that as a leaping off platform to get a bigger head coaching job. Maybe you get some stability with Joe Mo in Columbus for more than just a season or two, and you can kind of build that out more. It's fascinating. But like you said, there's definitely at least a candidate or two right now we are looking at that, or we're not looking at, I should say, that's going to emerge. It's going to be the guy. It's going to be surprising because that's how just powerful this Ohio State job is, without a doubt. Also, what we're kind of seeing too, speaking of powerful, we've seen, Chip, over the last few weeks, Big Ten coaches leave the conference to go to the NFL. And we just talked about Chip Kelly. A few other coaches around the conference here as well have made the plunge. Justin Fry, is there a concern at all? Brendan Carroll, we learned early on Monday, is joining his dad, which again makes a lot of sense there. Joining Pete to be their offensive line coach of the Raiders. Is there any sort of concern from your perspective? Any trend maybe you're seeing where we're starting to see a lot of these successful, Big Ten coaches now starting to run for the NFL?
It's interesting because I think right at the top when we talked about this topic, it's you don't have to recruit. You don't have to do the NIL and the money and the pressure of college. And there's a little bit more money. With Chip Kelly, there's a lot more money in the National Football League. I think it's the nature of where do you view the sport going? The stability of the NFL, as weird as this is to say, I think there's more stability because of the league, not because of the job. Your job is never stable in the NFL. It's
Right.
But because of the volatile nature of college sports and all that's involved with it, and as we just talked about, position coaches and recruiting, coordinators, I feel like the NFL provides more stability in life. So I think that's why you see it. But like for Brendan Carroll, I guess it makes sense because it's your dad's staff. But he left an offensive coordinator position at Washington to be an O-line coach and be behind Chip Kelly and his dad. Like, I guess you're learning from something there. I think it's just the nature of the sport now. I think it's the nature of the business. I think it's a change. I think people are afraid of what that change might be. There's so much uncertainty in college football. You know what the NFL, there's no uncertainty. The ratings for the Bills-Chiefs playoff game tells you there's no uncertainty in the NFL. Getting off season, if I have an opportunity to push my chips into that pile, I'm going to take advantage of that.
It sucks, but I agree that I like college football more than the NFL. I think it's more enjoyable. I get excited by it more. But like from a coaching perspective, even though I'm all for it, I'm very happy players getting paid. It's long overdue. With it, basically, you can go from no. Okay, yes, and all the floodgates are open. It is essentially 24/7, 365. You're recruiting. You're dealing with kids. You have NIL payments. You're doing it all. Like a coach's life sucks in general. But at least the NFL, you have an idea of, okay, this is the off season. Here's the quiet time. We can schedule vacation. Like if you're a head coach, Trip, like I don't know when you schedule it. When the hell do you go on vacation? There's always someone to talk to.
And if your team's incredibly successful and makes it to the semifinals or the finals of the playoff, like I was in Penn State's building last week interviewing Jim Knowles on Tuesday. No coaches were there because they're all recruiting. No coaches were there the week before because they're all recruiting. And then you have winter workouts at 5 a.m. Then you get spring ball and you got the portal open back up in the spring for a week. Then you have June official visits and recruiting weekends. Like, yeah, you get from the last week of June through the middle of July off, but then all of a sudden media days here, end of July and training camp, you get 1 month. You get 1 month. And in the NFL, you don't have to worry about scheduling your meetings around practice. You don't have to, or around classes. You don't have to worry about scheduling your meetings around their academic schedule. You don't have to worry about, hey, they have to come in here to lift because they have class in the afternoon. It's a 9 to 5. It's more of it's certainly still not a 9 to 5 job. People are getting early in the film room, but you have a life.
You're traveling less.
There's less obstacles. There's less conflict. I know an NFL player. I think there's so much reward in developing and seeing a young man come in at 16, 17, forming those relationships, building him into the player and developing him into the player to see him live out his dream. And a lot of people love that recruiting process of, I'm going to help identify, how can we build a program? You're involved in roster building and creation and management at the collegiate level. We're in the NFL, the GM and the head coach are going to do that in the front office. So I get it. But man, as you get older, I know you've experienced this. I've experienced it. To have a work-life balance, you don't get it in college football. No,
you're right. It's that and the money. It's tough. And that's, I think, part of just the overall organization. I think it's also why you're starting to see a lot more coaches more frequently talk about what? College football commissioner, to get organization, to try to get a unified schedule, to at least, if there's 2 portal windows, whatever, at least you can have some sort of schedule. I don't know if there's just get something kind of similar to the NFL where at least, okay, this is the off season, schedules get easy, just to where basically it's not 24/7, 365. You're on the phone with someone, whether it's a senior or a junior, NIL, transfer portal guy, it never stops. And I think you're starting to see a lot more coaches now, if they have the opportunity, get more money, which college football will never be able to compete with the NFL in terms of money. So that's never, going to be a winning battle. at least if you can make the lifestyle somewhat similar,
Mhm.
like you said, you can maybe make that reward of developing players a bigger reason for you to stick around in college football than you otherwise longer would.
Yeah. And Washington, real quick, I have a great transition to our next topic.
Ooh.
Washington's going to promote quarterback coach Jimmy Doherty to offensive coordinator. Jed Fish is still going to call the plays on offense, and Michael Switzer is the offensive line coach. Is their reorganization with Brennan Carroll going to the NFL with his dad and Chip Kelly. That, this whole thing is crazy scheduling if you actually have a spring game. Well, I guess you're still practicing 15 times, but Nebraska considering canceling their spring game?
Yeah, Matt Rhule on Saturday talking to the media trip was saying that he's considering it and most likely leaning towards canceling their spring game because when they had their spring game last year, got a lot of attention. Dylan Rolo was there. And he was saying that teams were calling his players after watching the spring game and giving them offers to jump in the portal and leave Nebraska. And so Matt Rhule, I guess, kind of fool me once, shame on me, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, is not getting fooled again and saying, you want to tamper my players? Screw you. No spring game. It's not official, but that's what they're leaning towards, Trip. And that just sucks because I don't think the spring game is for the players. It's not for the coaches. It really is for the fans in the community, right? Like it's a chance to have a game day in the spring. It's a chance to kind of get a little football back in your life. Maybe see a few players you otherwise wouldn't. They don't really show anything anyway in these games, but just a way to get excited for the season coming up. And I think to kind of take that away because of right now the current state of college football just flat out sucks.
And I don't think they're taking it away for the current state of college. Like you can give your reasons. We don't want to put stuff out there for other teams. We don't want to put our players out there for other teams to see. With how much recruiting goes on, every program knows who they are. Every program, what you're going to see in a 2-hour spring game that Big Ten Network's going to air, where you just said it, they're not showing any plays. It's kind of like a carnival. It's a way for the school to bring people to campus and probably make money on parking and concessions and all those. You're not getting anything out of a spring game. And even for the fans, I feel like all programs have gotten so conservative, whether it's with injury, putting stuff on film, afraid to showcase their whatever it may be. It's unfair to the fans to tell them and advertise to come to a game. Oh, come to our game from 2 to 4. We're going to be out there. It's actually going to be a scrimmage this year. And we're going to show you 15 minutes of football, and we're going to have a punting contest.
So you're in agreement with Matt? Like you're okay with the spring game being canceled?
I'm out on spring games
really?
to begin with.
Well, like you can't be in on them in the first. Like I think you have to know what to expect. Like maybe it's just me. But
no. Before every game was televised, they were and before everyone had a cell phone, they were legitimate scrimmages.
Mm-hmm. But like, let me ask you
when's
this.
the last spring game you watched and you're like actually enticed to watch it?
Couldn't tell you. I truly couldn't tell you.
I agree with you. I think it's a great chance for a family to come, get your kids around the team, autographs. It's a fun day. Get a taste of football in the spring. Athletic department can make a little money. I don't like his reasoning for it because I think it's a load of crap. Because everyone knows who all the players are already. Like they're not watching the spring game and going, wow, that guy's really good because I saw him run one play 40 yards in the spring game. So I think his reason's a load of crap. But I don't know that canceling a spring game's the end of the world here. I think it stinks for the fans and the families. But
is he afraid? Like, what do you think it is then?
I don't know, have an open training camp instead. We shouldn't even be having spring practice. Let's move it to the summer for OTAs. They don't have to worry about it.
You have had that not rant, but explanation before, that thought process before. Again, I don't think any fan, I think it's fair to say, I don't think many fans go to a spring game expecting to see good football.
And most of the schools this year, like Penn State spring games, the 26th, Nebraska's the 26th. I think Rutgers is the 26th. Those are the three at least I saw. That's when the portal's closing again. It's already been opening and closing.
Right. It opens April 16th, closes April 25th. Now, I've seen guys go in the portal. There are some questions they have about the portal.
Again, his reason's a bunch of crap. Don't agree with his reason, but spring football, spring games need to be reevaluated to begin with.
So if it's not tampering, why do you think he's canceling it? Because I don't like. I'm asking you, not like to. I don't know the answer. Like, I feel like it's just a free market. Like, I feel like the city of Lincoln would be like, "What are you doing? You can get 60,000 people in the stadium that otherwise wouldn't be there on a random April weekend." Just bad business. Just a little taste of, like, again, I don't think fan expectations are, I'm going to go and watch the number one offense against the number one defense for 30 minutes and see what happens. I think it's just like, we're back tailgating. We're back in college town again. Like you said, autographs on the field. Like, they have events where it's like you get up closer to the players more than ever before. I don't think many fans at this point go to spring games looking to see like actual real football. Interesting. And now it's also interesting too to see if other schools follow suit, right? It takes it looks like Nebraska is going to be the first.
All it takes is one, and all the dominoes will fall. I mean,
and it's interesting to see where it goes.
Everyone's going to if your athletic director lets you, because every coach would cancel it. It's a headache. It's a waste of a practice. But
let me ask you this.
As you mentioned, there's other reasons, like goodwill back to you're begging for money 365, 24/7. Like, here's a chance to give back a little bit.
Fair point. That's a good point by you. Like, okay, for Penn State spring game, right? Is that one where like it's would you call it a waste? Does the program view it as like a wasted day, a wasted practice?
I mean, there's so many workouts, there's so many practices. By the time you get to April, the end of April, and your 15th practice, it's kind of a reprieve.
Like that's how I viewed it, more like a celebration.
Bowl practices and playoff practices. I don't know that one day makes a huge deal, but you're definitely not running the same stuff you would in a normal practice day.
I guess also, like, what are they doing in spring practice? Like, how much?
A lot of install. It's more install terminology. Some days you'll go a little bit more physical, but it's more install football terminology. Certainly not individual skill stuff that you can do without the coaches, or you can do in kind of the workouts. I think it's building chemistry, install, that kind of stuff.
So if it's, for lack of a better term, just to kind of put it all in one boat here, fundamentals, right? It's a lot of fundamentals, getting your P's and Q's, learning the terminology, getting lined up right, maybe learning the playbook. Like, it feels like, to your point, like with winter workouts that are early, it's cold out, spring practices is tough, 15 of them, like, it feels like so while it's a reward, I think, for the community and just something to be like, okay, football's getting closer, it feels like it's almost a reward for the players too. Just like, hey, look, this is a practice, but we have fans here. We're in the stadium. It's just more like, I don't know. It just feels like, to me, like, I just view spring games as a celebration, as a reason to come together, as just an excuse to be like, okay, I'm going to go, back to college for a weekend, see friends that you maybe haven't seen in a while. Like, it just feels like there's so much around the weekend outside of the actual game where it's like, just to cancel it seems dumb.
You're viewing that as a Nebraska, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan fan.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue, Minnesota, they're not getting 30, 40,000, 50,000.
Right. But it's still like, for those that go, it's still like, but it's all the same. Like, if you're a football fan, isn't it, whether there's 30,000 or 10,000, like, okay, even if 10,000 people go to Purdue, it's 10,000 more that you would have there compared to a random weekend in April. Like, that just, like, forget everything else. That just seems like straight up bad business to say, we're going to say no thanks to what could be thousands of people coming in to our town that wouldn't be, like, I'm surprised, honestly, Trip,
but
that, like,
I don't
Matt
think
Rhule's allowed to make that decision.
Yes, Lincoln's different. State College is different. Columbus might be, it's the city. Tuscaloosa's different. Tallahassee's different. Clemson's different. But for most schools outside of the 20, 30 teams that people care about that have these huge fan bases, I just don't think spring games are moving the needle. I agree with you. I don't know how a coach could say we're canceling the spring game. Like, you better have a way to replace that business revenue, interest, giving back to your fans, families, opportunity to come. But in terms of like actual spring football, from a football X's and O's perspective, yeah, I can see why. I don't buy the portal thing, but I can see why from an X's and O's perspective. I mean, what do you get if you want to cancel the spring game? It's easy to point to the portal with the current nature of college football and say, well, it's because of that. Everyone will buy it. You don't want to go to your fans and go, we're canceling the spring game because we can't show anything out there because you all are here and filming every play on your cell phones.
Interesting. That's, I guess, a peek into the real world, I guess, sometimes, if you will, of college football. That's not all fun. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard conversation. I don't think they should cancel it. I don't think they should. It's a hard conversation. It's a weird conversation. Like, there's so many factors. It's not just a, hey, here's a coach canceling his spring game. Like, I think you hit the nail on the head.
I did not think we would talk about this. I'm with you. I didn't even think that was a possibility, but here we are. You said before, living up to the hype and kind of, being worth it. Let's make a bad transition worse here. Let's talk about Bryce Underwood of Michigan, who over the weekend was ruled by On3 to be the highest graded recruit in On3 history. Now, they were born in 2021, so they haven't been around forever, let's say. But still, the first 100 grade On3 has ever given a recruit has gone to Michigan quarterback Bryce Underwood. So clearly, right, this is a massive get for the Wolverines. When you look at now the hype coming in, what are fair expectations, Trip? Like, when you look at Bryce Underwood, we just project his career 2, 3, 4 years. Like, now with he's coming in all this hype and all this backup, what would you say is fair to expect if you're a Michigan fan from Bryce Underwood here in the next few years?
Man, and it's only harder too because he's from right down the road at Belleville High School, 20 minutes from Ann Arbor. And that's a school that didn't have, like, as I started to research and learn more about Bryce Underwood, I've watched some of the tapes that have been out there of him, but he took a high school program that had never won, and he's a local star already, and finished as a 4-year starter with a 50-4 record and a 38-game win streak and a pair of state championships. And he's 6'4", probably all of 220, 230 by now. And he's a good athlete, like, and he can run. The expectation of this caliber of talent coming in for Michigan after watching Jack Tuttle and Davis Warren and Alex Orji, I mean, the expectation is this is a program that's a year removed from winning the national championship. They're expected to compete for national championships. And this is the player that will put him on that stage. I honestly, because he's a freshman, we've seen how hard it is as a freshman, no matter who you are, especially Dylan Raiola. Like, he's kind of the easy example this year, and doesn't have the talent around him that I think Underwood will at Michigan, and probably not as highly touted. There's going to be some challenges for a freshman playing in the Big Ten. The schedule that Michigan plays, to be having to play, and I know they don't play Penn State in the regular, but having to play the Penn States, Oregons, Ohio States of the world. It's a little bit different walking into Autzen Stadium and 70,000 people are screaming at you, or walking into the Horseshoe, or walking to Beaver Stadium, or walking to Kinnick. I think it's unfair, the amount of hype and expectation that's going to be placed on his shoulders. But to answer your question, it is from day one to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football.
I want to read this to you from On3, how they describe Bryce Underwood coming in. And they said he is, quote, the combination of size, arm talent, and athleticism is reminiscent of players like Josh Allen and Cam Newton. You just read his accomplishments in high school. Like,
But he's
I don't
17.
think it's crazy. Right. No, he's young. Let's get nuts here. Here's a hot take. You said I haven't given you many hot takes recently. Here's one. I think it's fair to expect Bryce Underwood to be the greatest quarterback in Michigan history. Like, I don't think it's unfair to put those expectations on him. You look at the hype coming in with all the physical tools he has. I'm not saying he has to win a national championship like J.J. McCarthy, because I think before even McCarthy 2 years ago, if you look at like some of the best Michigan quarterbacks in history, Brian Griese, Chad Henne, like I don't think you have to win a championship in order to be considered the best. Because when you look at J.J. McCarthy, right, the big thing that everyone always talked about him was that he didn't do a lot, right? He handed the ball off. He made a few throws when he had to, but Michigan wasn't built to win through him. It was built through running the football and playing tough defense. So it's like, I don't think, like, when you look at the hype coming in, his skill and what we presume to have, you know, a reload here from Michigan where they're going to have talent around him, you think maybe not fully by this year, but by next year as well. I think the bar should be this guy. We should be talking about him in 2 or 3 years from now as the greatest quarterback in Michigan history.
And you're talking about like where does it rank in terms of hype and expectations for a quarterback for Michigan? And looking at the names of who they've had, like Denard Robinson, Tate Forcier, I would say as much hype. Chad Henne's probably the one that's had the most expectation. He's probably the most expectation probably ever. But if you're trying to go back in the last 20 years, 25 years, Chad Henne, Pennsylvania kid, right? Didn't end up going to Penn State, goes to Michigan, incredibly highly recruited, highly touted. He's probably the guy that had the most hype surrounding him. But even Henne was third on the depth chart when he got to his freshman season. And then Henne eventually came in as a true freshman and started on opening day.
He's got to earn it. I'm not saying
he had to work his way up. Like, it's not just going to be, don't they have a transfer coming in from Fresno State at quarterback too?
Mikey Keene. No, I'm not saying you give him the job. I agree. I have no problem with having him earn it. If you want to sit here and say for spring ball, he's third in the depth chart, I have no problem with that. But I think when you look at, again, his size, his athletic ability, the talents, the hype, again, when you're the highest grade in On3 history, which again, within the last 5 or so years, so I get it's a small sample size, but still, and we've seen some good quarterbacks come out of high school recently in the last few years, to be the best of the best right now in recent history. And it's not like Michigan has a tremendous lineage of quarterback play. I don't think the bar is extremely high, especially again, when we're not talking about like tying team success. Like, again, I think J.J. McCarthy is probably the most successful Michigan quarterback with 3 years in a row of high level play. They made the playoff, beat Ohio State, won a national title. But I think just in terms of his accomplishments, his playing, taking team success out of it, you assume team success will come if he plays well, but just not tying his, that ranking or that qualification to championships. I feel like we are looking at what should be the best quarterback in Michigan history. No pressure.
Let me read to you the 2022 On3 football. He's 17, he's 16. It's a ranking. Like, I think the expectation is for him to do that, but it's unfair. On3's rankings for the 2022 football recruiting class, quarterback. Number 1, 99 overall. So one off the 100, Devin Brown.
Oh, wow. Larry Bird? Larry Bird was that high? Sheesh.
On3 ranking, 99.
Wow.
98, Ty Simpson. 97, Brady Allen. 97, Connor Weigman. 96, Cade Klubnik. 96, Nick Evers. 95, Walker Howard.
Okay. He's bounced around a few times.
Wow. 99. There's one there's one name that kind of stands out.
It's not great. That's not great. Look, to your point, yes. That is like he's 7 and how many it's a fact, right? More 5 stars bust than hit. it is the most volatile, trying to, have a hit rate, and most unpredictable, trying to project how a high school kid goes to college and how he plays. I get that. But I just I don't think that should mean that when you look at his accomplishments, his size, the hype around, I don't think that means that we should water down expectations. If he goes into Michigan and
But
sucks,
I'm telling you, you should. You should. It's unfair to expect
is it not his
day one to
appointment?
step on campus and be the savior. You have to.
I'm also not saying day one. I'm not even saying 2025 has to be great. I'm saying when he walks off campus,
The
whatever that
expectation is
2027, 2028.
he's going to be great. No. If you're 100 and the hype and the Michigan, the whole thing, you might not think it. I might not think it. Day one, the expectation is he's going to be great.
Dylan Rhule had maybe a more disappointing season than I thought he would have, but if he's slightly better than Dylan Rhule, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think it is a jump to make. And again, I don't think immediate success. I think immediate success is extremely tough for any freshman quarterback anywhere.
But that might be you and I. If you read all the stories and what everyone expects Michigan to be next year, and the pressure on Michigan to bounce back next year, is what we're saying different than the national narrative and the regional narrative and the Ann Arbor narrative on this guy? It is. It's not fair. It's not fair. Because what we're saying, I agree with you, but what we're saying is two different things than what the actual narrative is on the kid.
Good luck, Bryce. A lot of expectations to live up to. Be a very interesting. You want to talk about paying attention to the spring game and spring practice. Those Michigan practices. You want to talk about, you think training camp breakdowns of quarterback stats are bad?
That's why we have spring games, so fans can get their first look at Bryce Underwood. For fans can get their first look at Brian Hartline calling plays for all whatever. That's why we have the spring games.
Oh man, there will be tweets. There's no doubt about it. Their quarterback throws a pick. Brian Hartline sucks. This guy can't draw up a play. See, that's why we need the spring game. I need stuff like that on Twitter. I need a good laugh of fans overreacting to a glorified practice or fans overreacting to a beat reporter. What are you insinuating?
From you overreacting to.
My God. I get emotional. Sue me. But fine, I'll overreact too. A guilty as charged. As someone who just said he should be the greatest quarterback in Michigan history. Fine, I overreact. I get sucked up at the moment sometimes. It's all fun. It's all fun. Let's finish the pod with some more fun. Trip. Part 2, transfer portal winners, losers. In case you missed it last Monday, we gave our first batch. In terms of just to recap really fast, winners, we thought in the transfer portal, Oregon, Nebraska, Indiana, Washington. Losers, Purdue, Northwestern had their rosters rated. And we called 3 schools directionless: Rutgers, Wisconsin, Maryland. All right, part 2, let's stick right here on script. Trip, Michigan. When you look at how they did in the transfer portal here, winner, loser, do you feel like they have at least a direction and a sense of what they're trying to do and who they're trying to be? How would you grade the transfer portal session, the session number 1 for the Wolverines?
Yeah, they're trying to fill some pieces where they lost pieces after this past season. A couple of defensive linemen from big-time schools like Clemson defensive lineman. Trey Williams, 5 years at Clemson, the number 10 ranked defensive lineman in the portal, number 104 overall. Damon Payne from Alabama. And then on the offensive side, Indiana wide receiver Donovan McCulley. They lost a wide receiver, Tyler Morris, to Indiana. So they essentially traded there. They were in the mix for those Notre Dame offensive linemen. We saw Rocco Spindler go to Nebraska, which is a huge get, a 2-year starter at guard for Notre Dame, a huge get for the Huskers. There's no question Nebraska, once again, the offseason champions of college football. But Alabama going and getting running back Justice Haynes, 34th ranked recruit, number 3 running back, comparison actually to Will Shipley, who's at Clemson and just finished the NFC Championship game pretty well for the Eagles against Washington 2 Sundays ago. I think Michigan knows the type of player it needs, where they need to address. I think they probably would have loved to get one of those linemen from Notre Dame, but ultimately it's a good portal class for Michigan.
No, you're right. And if you look at Michigan State, we talked about this when we talked about Nebraska. Like sometimes some of your biggest gets are not who you get in the portal, but who you keep. I think just to start off Michigan State trip, the fact they're able to keep Nick Marsh on their roster, not have him rated, I think you got to give a lot of credit to Jonathan Smith of just like, whoo. Now, I guess you got to hold your breath again come springtime. But at least for right now, the winter session, big win, I think, for the Spartans in keeping their dynamic receiver. Also, they got Connor Moore to kind of beef up the offensive line. So, like, they got, I think, some solid guys well to kind of fit some pieces. That's still a roster that feels like it's 2 or 3 years away with Jonathan Smith. He's more of a developer, right? I think like, we saw at Oregon State, how he got to his success with the Beavers was he'll take 3-star guys, kind of like Iowa, and kind of make them 4 stars. He's good kind of getting those under the radar guys. I think you'll see that also in the portal. I don't expect Michigan State here going forward to make some big splashes. But it's those guys you don't really pay attention to the most, under the radar guys. I think that really where Smith makes his bones. But again, I think it's also a big testament to him. You can keep Marsh. That's a good sign for your program. Of at least there's some belief in where this offense is going.
And with the quantity of 16 commits, it's the number 6 portal ranked class in the Big Ten. Penn State, meanwhile, the 72nd ranked class, according to 24/7 Sports. But James Franklin traditionally has been very choosy and very picky about where they go in the portal and only filling spots like they feel like they need. And they rely on their development. They rely on their recruiting, and then make sure they have the type of player that fits what they need skill-wise, but also with their culture and their program. And I think because of the roster they have coming back, they can be particularly choosy again going into the 2025 season. So obviously the big position that everyone's talked about, we've talked about, the nation's talked about with Penn State going into next year is wide receiver. Well, getting USC wide receiver Kyron Hudson, 462 yards, 3 touchdowns, has played in big games, has made some spectacular catches, gives you that athletic, the length at wide receiver. That's a guy they're hoping can come in and contribute from day number 1. And then the other spot you fill at wide receivers with Devontae Ross, smaller, shiftier, KJ Hamler type, Troy wide receiver, had a big game, special teams and on offense against Iowa this year, over 1,000 yards receiving, 11 touchdowns. That's 2 guys at the position where they need to fill because, you thought, okay, you get those 2, you still have like an Amari Evans or Harrison Wallace back. Well, both decided to transfer. Wallace to Ole Miss, Evans to Washington. So now these 2 still feel like, yeah, you trust the development of a Peter Gonzalez, or Caden Saunders gets healthy and you got Liam Clifford. What are some of these young receivers you had this year? What's the next step for a Tyseer Denmark? Still feels like to me, Penn State's got to go out and get someone else at that position that has experience, some size that can come in and play right away and add depth there. Then it's an offensive line that's 3 deep at nearly every position. I mean, some people have not even talked about Javen Williams as being a starter next year, which is incredible to think about with how gifted he is and how highly touted he was as a prospect. But they added that group too, and get TJ Shanahan from Texas A&M, bring back a safety, Alabama's King Mack, who was at Penn State 2 years ago, had a really good freshman season, goes to Alabama. Like, you know what? I don't like it. You guys want me back? Sure. I think he bolsters a position of need. So I think Penn State's addressed positions of need, continue to add a little depth here and there. Still think they need to get a little bit more at the wide receiver position. But overall, it's a good class for James Franklin. Probably not spectacular. There's no like super flashy name at wide receiver, but you have to trust that their development and their evaluation of those prospects. But I would expect them to still be active when April comes around.
That spring portal window is going to be huge. Like I said, yeah. And Penn, it's funny because like Penn State does not use the portal maybe as other big schools would or should. Like I said, they do a great job of really retention, right? And development to where they don't lose a lot of guys in the portal. Like you mentioned, Amari Evans and Trey Wallace kind of going.
But where they've used the portal, they've really hit. When they have. Sure. Look at their cornerback, A.J. Harris and Jalen Kimber this year, position they certainly needed to bolster, knowing that they have young talent that wasn't ready to go yet. Arnold Ebiketie at the defensive end position really sticks out from Temple, but they've missed at wide receiver. And for whatever reason, the portal guys they've brought in, Julian Fleming was a winning player. He played winning football. He was a blocker. He earned his playing time, but they needed a guy with some flash there. Who am I thinking of? The receiver? Why do I always forget the receiver from Kent State that they brought in 2 years ago? Dante Cephas was supposed, that didn't work out. At Arizona State this year, Malik, I'm so prepared for this podcast. Not Malik Mega,
former Florida State
Malik
receiver,
McClain.
Right?
Malik McClain had a decent year at Arizona State, but he didn't pan out here. So for whatever reason, that position has been a little bit haunted for them. Cephas, McClain, it just has.
And I'm with you. Like, they got 2 additions. I think that's definitely a position they need to add just more, just to get just more hits. Just try to bring more guys and hope that 1 or 2 stick.
And I think you asked this about Penn State, and we'll move on to Ohio State really quick. But like with a Corey Smith, a Quentin Martin, like how do you factor their skill sets into your offense, knowing that they're 2 of your better players on the offensive side, like dangerous with the football, when you have a Kaytron Allen and a Nicholas Singleton back? Do you consider a positional change? How does Andy Kotelnicki build this offense? Like a guy like Ross, who's shifty and fast, like how does he build the offense with the tight end depth, the running back depth? Can they mask some of their deficiencies? We saw at some point you still need a receiver to make a play, as we saw. How do they balance it with all the talent they have at other positions on that roster? Can they supplement their deficiencies at the wide receiver spot?
Be interesting to watch, like you said, as that spring window does come. As you go to Ohio State, not as flashy as last year's portal class where they got Will Howard, where they got Quinshon Judkins, when they got Caleb Downs. Still pretty solid, though, for the Buckeyes. You get tight end Max Clare out of Purdue, 685 yards last year and 4 touchdowns. You get C.J. Donaldson out of West Virginia, a veteran running back, kind of more like that hammer, if you will. If you have a Thunder and Lightning, he's more the Thunder. Almost 750 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns. So that goal line running back, that physicality Donaldson brings, that they bolstered the offensive line. Philip Daniels out of Minnesota. You got a tackle from Rice. You got a linebacker, Ty Howard from the NEC. Shout out Duquesne as well. Like Ohio State, again, it's not as flashy and star-studded as was last year. They got some good depth pieces, some good help as well. At some skill positions where they did lose a lot, especially again at tight end. Max Clare is going to be, I think, a good one there and a good fit. And when you look at losses, right, because that's where like Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, right, it's not just about who you get, it's also how do you retain the talent you have. They did lose 2 quarterbacks, Aaron Nolan, Devin Brown. Devin Brown, as mentioned before, went to Cal. Aaron Nolan going to South Carolina. But again, with Tavon St. Clair there being a 5-star guy last year, it seems like he was going to win the job anyway. So maybe at worst, you lose a backup quarterback, or at least a guy that can compete for the starting job. I think it's a very solid class there for Ryan Day. Also, again, considering that he was doing this in the middle of college football playoff prep, how would you assess the Buckeyes here, Trip?
Yeah, really strong. I think, look, everyone's talked a lot about their offensive line. They went out and addressed the offensive line. That was the most important thing. Claire gives them another elite option in the passing game. Donaldson, I'm interested to see what he's got left on the treads. He was really good as a freshman at West Virginia, has battled injuries, but it's typical Ohio State, and getting Sonny Styles and Igbinosun to come back, help on that defense, or else they literally could have lost almost every starter except for Caleb Downs on defense. So yeah, that's big for them there. I think it's a win. Ohio State's a clear winner, as you would expect in the portal.
No, you're right about that. I would say Illinois was a winner here as well,
Yes.
Trip, in part because talking about, knowing your identity, knowing who you are, Brett Bielema knows who this team is, and they bolstered their team at positions where they're trying to, again, really establish dominance, and they did a really good job on the defensive line. They're losing some talent as well, but I think they did a good job at replenishing some of that defensive line talent. There's no question, Trip, about who Illinois is, and I just love the fact that Brett Bielema, because, again, we talked about it like with Rutgers, with Maryland, what are you trying to do, who are you trying to get? Like, there's no question Illinois knows where their bread is buttered, what they do well. And I think in the transfer portal, they knew where to attack position-wise to make sure that 2025 can end up where I think a lot of us are talking about in the playoff.
And ultimately, shifting gears really quick to Iowa, right? They only added 5 players via the portal. They had the circus last year with Alabama offensive tackle Caden Proctor. And you look at this class and go, how can you only add 5 players? Well, if they hit on South Dakota State, I know they got Hank Brown from Auburn too at quarterback, but if they hit on South Dakota State quarterback Mark Gronowski, then the class is a success because he's a 2-time FCS champion. He's a little bit bigger. He can run. He's thrown for over 10,000 yards, 93 touchdowns in 4 years. He's won nearly 1,800 rushing yards, 37 touchdowns, allegedly going to compete with Brendan Sullivan for the job. It's Gronowski's job. If he can bring a dual threat passer runner to that quarterback position, and he can elevate the quarterback position for Iowa to something they haven't had the last couple of years with the circus they've had with Cade McNamara and everything else, like if he can elevate that quarterback position and add a running element from the quarterback position to that offense, I don't care that their class only has 5 players. That's a win for Iowa, but they need to hit on him, kind of making that same transition. He's bigger, but that same transition that Max Brosmer made last year going to Minnesota.
No, you're right. And it's a dynamic quarterback for forget the last few years, like the last few decades. Someone can actually run and pass the ball at a high level. Like I said, Gronowski, we'll see how he kind of rehabs here in the offseason. But that's, at least on paper, a great get for Iowa and Kirk Ferentz, no doubt about it. And kind of similar to Minnesota, when you look at quarterback, I don't know about you, Trip. I love the addition of Zach Pyron out of Georgia Tech. Guy's a gamer. He's tough. He was someone who was able to step in when Haynes King was kind of battling injuries. Like PJ Fleck, again, kind of taking, like you said, knowing his identity, kind of taking a page out of the book. What he did last year, Max Brosmer, veteran quarterback, has seen a lot, can step in right away, bring some leadership to this offense. There's a playbook there for PJ Fleck, and he's tapping into it. I think they got another good one here with Pyron from the Yellow Jackets.
But they're one of those schools that's middle tier to lower tier Big Ten. They lose an offensive tackle like Phillip Daniels to Ohio State. It's how can you retain your talent and keep guys that really are showcase players from going to your league competitors, especially the upper level league competitors. And that's the problem for your Minnesotas of the world right now. Certainly we talked about it a ton when we talked about Purdue and Northwestern. Minnesota, they can't afford that to happen with how much they want to compete at this level and where they think they can go in the Big Ten. That is a big loss for them. And I have a lot of concerns about the Gophers going to next year with all of the overhaul of their coaching, losing so many coaches to different positions in collegiate football and in the NFL. I'm a little bit concerned about all the changes that PJ Fleck's group has had to encounter going into next season and the talent they lost. Like, look at the talent they lost going to the next level too from last season. I'm a little bit concerned about Minnesota.
The talent is one thing that I agree with. I will give PJ Fleck right now the benefit of the doubt because part of the reason why his coaching staff has gotten rated in previous years, and especially this offseason, is because he's hiring good guys. He's identifying talent well. He's bringing them up. So I'll give him right now the benefit of the doubt, kind of what we're talking about with Ryan Day when he has to replace both coordinators for Ohio State. Like, I think PJ Fleck has earned that. But to your point, like, when the well's constantly drying, sometimes there are misses. Good coaches make misses with hires all the time, especially if they're happening more frequently. But I think at least right now, PJ Fleck deserves the benefit of the doubt with what he's done. But you're right. It's the nature of the beast right now. This is the reality of a program like Minnesota, like a Maryland, like a Rutgers, where if you have good coaches, good players, bigger programs, bigger sharks are going to come in, offer more money, better resources, better opportunities. It's really tough. It's really, really, really tough. We talked about some small transfer portal classes recently. How about a big one here? UCLA, who, to their credit, has gotten some good talent. They're at least ranked 20th in the country by 24/7 Sports with their transfer portal class. They brought in 20 commitments, highlighted by Joey Aguilar out of App State, who looks to be their starter for next season. Just threw for over 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns. They did have 14 interceptions, so a little loose of the football. You're able to get Cal wide receiver Mikey Matthews there as well. And they really went hard, Trip, on the offensive line, getting 3 potential starters there for their 5 out of the portal, including kind of the headliner there is Cortland Ford out of Kentucky. UCLA, it's tough, right? But I think right now, when you kind of look at where the program is, they have to, I think, build through the portal for the next few years before they can really kind of start to plant some roots down. I think you got to give Deshaun Foster here some credit for at least being able to make UCLA attractive to where they're getting some good talent out of the portal.
And credit him for making them way more competitive at the end of the last season than we thought they were going to be. I think that, you start how they looked against Hawaii and how they looked at the beginning of the year, a program without direction. At least they had some direction. Now losing Sturdivant, the speed over the top, big time, big play receiver to Florida hurts. Justin Martin played really pretty well for them in relief, transferring in conference to Maryland, but you feel like getting the App State guy. I think it's a mixed bag for UCLA, but I agree with you. They understand they need quantity and quality through the transfer portal right now because they're still looking at rebuilding and relaying a foundation there after Chip Kelly left and everyone left UCLA.
No, you're right. And that's what I said. I think building that through the port, it's kind of backwards, but I think for some schools like UCLA, that's kind of the way you got to go. And at least in terms of getting commits and some good ones as well, it seems like Deshaun Foster did as well of a job as you could ask for right now with the situation that the Bruins are in. Let's finish your trip in LA with USC, who you talk about being busy in the portal trip. They added a lot. They lost a lot. They lose the Branch brothers. They lose Emmanuel Pregnone. They lose Deuce Robinson, Kyron Hudson, Quentin Joyner, Bear Alexander. A lot of those guys stayed in conference there as well. You add a lot of talent here. Like, there's so much to dive into for USC, and we can have a bigger discussion on a different pod about their future and everything else. But, like, a lot of additions, a lot of subtractions. Where does it average out to you? Good, bad, and different here for Lincoln Riley?
I'd say indifferent for them. Like, I think Branch is a great, dangerous player. Prignone's a good player. Joyner, they lost a lot of talent, but they also brought it. Like, they're USC. They're not void of talent. It's not it's still an attractive place to go. And when you bring in a Bishop Fitzgerald, safety, North Carolina State, wide receiver from Boise State that I saw in person. He's big at 6'5", Prince Traction. I can read through all the names, but it's USC. Talent goes out, talent comes in. They're never void of talent. But kind of the same as we talked about with Minnesota, man, so many moving parts. Like, you want to be bought in, and it really comes down to, is the talent, can they get it all to mesh and play together? And did they hit at the quarterback position? Because they're good. Miller Moss is out. And is it
forgot to mention him. My apologies.
Yeah. Which we expected based on the end of last season when the reins were turned over. But you have to hope either your incumbent or one of the big time talents, 5 stars you bring in, hits. It's USC, it's Lincoln Riley. You think it would, but this is Hollywood. This is a Hollywood portal. This is a Hollywood class. This is a Hollywood team, and it's certainly not void of storylines.
I think that's why, like, it feels like
so confusing. It's like, I don't even know what to say. It's okay. They lost a lot of talent, but they have a lot of talent, and they brought a lot of talent in. It's just, do all the puzzle pieces come together? That's why I didn't want to keep reading the names. It's honestly a perplexing program to address right now because it feels like they should be better record-wise, but they're still really competitive last year. They just didn't win games. And I don't think the talent levels changed based on who's coming and going. I think they need fit. I think they need a culture thing. Like, some of the guys on there, they're great players, great athletes, but they're a little LA. How does your culture, what's your identity? That's to me the USC thing right now.
That's a fair, and that's why I keep kind of go back to coaching, and maybe identity is even the more overarching point here. And I think you're right. Like, and maybe when you see the hire Dre Brown and they steal Notre Dame's, basically, for lack of a better term, GM to make it their GM, like, maybe they are getting guys from the Midwest to try to build a more Big Ten team. That also then has to go with, is Lincoln Riley okay with coaching a Big Ten styled team? Or does he want to win his way, which kind of feel like he lost some games because he wanted to win his way, which was throwing the football, throw, and we're going to win it in a certain way. And if we're not, we're going to lose, and it's okay. Like, I think so much of it, number one, comes down to me, Lincoln Riley coaching. And then number two, like, doesn't it, when you like look at USC, it feels like that should be a team that cleans up in the portal. Not that you have to do it to win. I don't think building through the portal, again, is sustainable. But like, when you look at the glitz, the glam, USC, the program, the location, like, if you jump in the portal, it feels like it's like they should have a leg up and should have a leg up resource-wise, which they don't compared to other schools. Like, I think even just highlighting some of the, like, the loss is fine, but even just some of the additions, I feel like you should expect better from USC, because it's like USC should still mean something. And maybe now that's part of the problem. Kids are 18, 19, 20 years old. They don't really remember the Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart days. Some of them weren't even alive for them. And like, you look back at recent history outside of like 2022 with Caleb Williams, when they almost made the playoff and almost won the Pac-12, it's like, what has USC done the last 20 years? It's like, make kids say, I want to play for them. The answer is nothing. And it's like, it's just crazy. Like when you see what they used to be, and now it's just like, honestly, it's just another school. And in the portal, feel like
I disagree with that. I still think it's the stars. They're still getting talent. I still think USC's got an aura to it. I disagree that it's another school.
Really?
Yeah.
And maybe it's on
like their video, everything they do, they're still getting good players. They're still getting
they're not devoid of talent. And Lincoln Riley had a top 15, I think it was.
So that means they're not another school. Their results they had a Heisman Trophy winner 2 years ago. That's not just another school. They had that first round. They had the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. That's not another school. Before Caleb Williams' final season in California, they were good. They're not another school.
But that's also, I think it's like you look at the 2020, like outside of the 2022 season.
They're not another school. They're an underachieving superpower in the sport.
Which, like, again, if we're talking about kids that are 20 years old that are born in 04,
USC is still one of the top 15 brands in college football. So they're not another school.
Like, yes, but I don't know.
I'm not saying where you feel like success meter. I'm saying if you put the logos of schools up, USC's in the top 15.
But I think, like, to your marketing fans of like, if you're 30 and above, like, yes. I think, though, if you're like a college age kid right now or a high school recruit, I don't think they feel the same way. I think it's part of the problem. Because there's no success.
I disagree
outside,
with
again,
that.
there's 1 year that we're never talked about USC in the national picture the last 15 years. And so, like, if they're not, like, when has USC been good? They've been nowhere near the playoff. They've been nowhere near the top of the Pac-12. They haven't had good quarterback play where you're looking at, like, some of these guys. Like,
their quarterback won the Heisman 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Like, I'm taking 2022 out of it for a second. Outside of that 1 year, that now is, like, you look back recently, there's just, I think you are thinking about it from, like, oh, like, I remember them when they were young, and of course they're a top power, and of course they have all this history. I'm trying to look at it like if you're anywhere from 17 to 21-year-old, I just don't, and I think
and all you know is Clay Helton and Lincoln Riley. Is that what?
Yes, and that's not great. You don't remember Pete Carroll, and that's why
it's still USC though.
They feel like one of those schools that should be cleaning up in the portal more than they are. That should be a more attractive school when you look at, like, location, history, and it just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't feel like that. That's my point. That's where some of the frustration comes in. Lincoln Riley's got to show it. And again, I think success first breeds and everyone wants to go there. And to your point now with their hirings, and maybe, again, you become less reliant on the portal and you change your identity. Maybe that's part of it, kind of undergoing a shift in philosophy and team building. But for USC, that's how I feel.
I mean, they had a top 15 recruiting class this year. They had a top 20 recruiting class 2 years ago. Granted, USC, to your point, you'd expect to be 1 through 5, right? Alabama, Ohio State, USC, Notre Dame. But they have the 4th ranked class for 2026 already. I think they're still held in that regard, even though the results haven't been. They're a top 10 class in 2023. I think they're still held in that regard, even though the results haven't been there. I think you're looking at it more as like a power rating. What's the team's chances to win the national title versus glitz and glamour and the power of the logo and the brand?
I wouldn't look at it from a power rating perspective. It's just, I guess, more relevancy.
USC or Indiana, who's more relevant?
I mean, USC. But it's USC, like, it's also like
USC or Florida State.
Over the last decade, I would have to say Florida State.
If you're a recruit right now, are you going to Florida State?
USC or Oregon? USC or Oregon?
Oregon.
I would agree. And that wasn't the case for 95% of their existence. Chip Kelly kind of overtook USC, and they've never kind of looked back since. And they've had some down years, and
outside of outside of Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Georgia,
Texas, Oklahoma.
No, I would put USC in the same conversation as maybe not Texas, but Oklahoma for sure. I would put them in the same conversation as Notre Dame, Penn State.
Notre Dame's another one.
No, they're in the same conversation as those schools. They still are. They still are.
I look at USC. They're not Nebraska. They're at least a step, maybe two above. But it feels like where it's like a former power, used to run the sport, all this dominance, all this excitement, everyone to go to Nebraska, and they haven't been relevant in like 30 years because they haven't been good. And now I don't think kids these days look at Nebraska the way they used to in the 90s. That's, to me, like, it just feels like 10 years delayed.
But they have... Okay. So, we can't... not going back. I mean, they had the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in the first overall pick in the NFL draft.
For 1 year. That's part of the problem, is one blip on the radar. That has been the anomaly.
But it's still an attractive
2 decades.
place. I don't like that. You're talking about success, but it's still an attractive place. If you get a letter from USC, you're still considering it.
No, I'm not saying it's not attractive. I'm saying it should be more attractive than it is. I'm saying it should be more. It's like USC should be a 10.
Top 5 program instead of top 15
USC should be a 10. Like when she walks in the room, whoa, stunner. Like right now, like an 8. It's not bad. But there's still so much potential that should be there for USC that they've not gotten back to yet. That's what I'm saying. They're not Indiana. Not Purdue. I'll do it. It's late.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to rest up a few more days for the big games here. A few more days for the next pod.
I know. They're going to come fast and furious. Tuesday, then Thursday. This is fun, though. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Although I'm kind of leaning towards Tuesday mornings for recording instead of
you don't like night. Still enrolled after dark as we are now, as we're recording this Monday night, 3 minutes away from midnight. Fair. Okay. Well, either way, thank you for joining us here on the Still Enrolled package. We definitely went a little long here towards the end, but appreciate you sticking through. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your pods on YouTube. Again, new slight schedule change. Release date will be Tuesdays and Thursdays moving forward. Still, you can find all the same places, YouTube and on podcasts as well. So we're not going anywhere. We're just changing one day slightly, but they still same, hopefully, great, if not lunacy content coming your way. Have a great rest of your week. Sleep tight. We'll talk to you on Thursday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.